So, hi everybody, and thanks for joining us in Ballroom 3 here. I guess, so I'm Christy Hansen. I'm an associate professor of agricultural and applied economics at the University of Wyoming and water resource economics specialist in Wyoming. I've also been named water goddess, but that's not an exclusive title, so any of you all are welcome to join me with that.
I'll introduce myself, Sam Fernald, Director of the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute and Professor of Watershed Management at New Mexico State University.
And Brett has asked me to start by noting that this session is being recorded so that we can get this information out quickly to anybody who is not able to be here right now. Okay.
And we have a virtual audience.
And we have a virtual audience as well. So we see Freddie there. I'm not sure if anybody else has joined us right now, but Freddie has joined us for a lot of the last 2 days as well from Kansas.
Oh, we have other.
Oh, great. We've also got Ginger and others as well. Okay, good. So the point of this session is to share with all of you who have been in other rooms over the past few days what we've been doing in this room here to build out the Western Water Network. So I'd like to start first. So Mike on Tuesday had everybody on the leadership team who had been working on this issue stand up. I would like for all of us who have been in this room for the past few days to stand up so that you can see who has been working on this project. So we have a few slides for you. This is fairly informal. We just want to share with you what we've been doing. And so first of all, please recall from Mike's presentation on Tuesday that our leadership team with Brett and Doreen's guidance has been meeting for 1.5 years now to conceive of the Western Water Network. And I want to draw your attention here on this roadmap to the pink violet slide, the stakeholder survey box. So we conducted a survey of water experts in the Western US to ask them what needs, challenges, and issues they saw for water moving forward. And so that was really our starting point for this week. And the next slide, please, Lucia. And remember that Mike's set of objectives for us was to build the Western Water Network so that it benefits everyone in the West, plan a Congress for 2023, and also to move the needle substantively on Western water security at scale. And so this is basically what we have spent the last few days working on, basically developing a more cohesive and collective understanding of what the Western Water Network could be. And I really just want to say, as an aside, that I was really quite surprised at how quickly we got to a we. Everybody was saying we about this Western Water Network. So I think this idea, as it developed, really gained a lot of traction with folks who were really just engaging with it for the first time. And so what is the Western Water Network? Well, we all are working within our state silos, right? Research, extension specialists, and educators, but water usually crosses state boundaries. So the Western Water Network, we conceive as a way for all of us in the land grant system and our key clientele, including Jackie and John and Tony, who have benefited, who have given us their wisdom over the past few days as well. It's a way for all of us to talk across these boundaries to facilitate meaningful action on water issues. Towards increased and more integrated collaboration among all of these people across state boundaries and over other boundaries too, as you'll see in a few minutes. So let's use this land grant lens that's in our DNA to figure out how we can complement the efforts of existing organizations focused on water at scale across state boundaries in the West. So I wonder now if Brett and Doreen, if you would be willing to just take a few brief minutes to share with us what it is that you all in your other rooms conceived of when you thought about the Western Water Network. What were some of the topics that you talked about?
Yes, for the next slide.
Next slide. Next slide.
Well, and Mike and I are going to do this in tandem. So we were both facilitating in with the Western Extension Directors Association. And so Mike, please help me fill in the gaps. Some of the greatest needs. So we looked at the two questions that we were from module 1. Questions 1 and 2 looked at the greatest needs and our added value. And we were looking at the Western Network, Water Network could provide given our extension lens. So this is with our extension, our field faculty, our staff, our educators, and also our audience, our constituents that we work with. And so we felt that the greatest needs that we have is that understanding the multiple users of water from the community, health, tribal, recreational. I mean, all of these are audiences that we have. And so to understand the multiple users of water and then consider how the language we use when we talk about water issues to our different audiences. That extension can be a great convener and a facilitator because we do that in a holistic way in communities with all of those multiple users of water. So we really need that water literacy and understanding why water is so important so that we can explain that to our constituents that we work with and bring a greater understanding of why water is so crucial. The other one that is the greatest need is the social justice issues around water. If the Western Water Network could help us with that and help provide some information, that would be fabulous. And then another great need is the ability to predict droughts so that we can be proactive and relevant and be ahead of working with our communities in all these different groups. And so your science, your background to help us be relevant in predicting that. And the other item that greatest need is pilot projects available on the ground so that extensions, so that our LGUs are seen as a really great resource, credible, proactive, and working with our groups. And then I'm going to turn the added value. Does that work?
Sure. Let me start by saying that I was intrigued that the conversation with the extension directors went very quickly from if there's a positive opportunity for collaboration to how best to. And I think it's worth noting that at the outset. And then building on everything that Doreen has said, right? Recognizing the traditional strengths of extension and how those would play into a relationship with the network, how we could help with the transmission of water literacy across the West, how we could address the social issues, social justice issues that Doreen talked about. And so turning to action, we talked about how would we go about developing one or more water literacy educational toolkits that could be packaged and delivered at the local level through extension. The translational value of extension, obviously, for the research that would be conducted or aggregated by the water network, and how we could participate in translating that to the field, if you will, but really to the general population. We talked about ways that we could improve the capacity of extension professionals across the region to do that, and actually talked a bit about developing a certificate program for extension professionals that could be used to improve their capacity to engage communities around issues related to water. We talked a bit about maybe that would grow even to something that we could call a Western Water Academy that would provide a capacity or an opportunity for extension professionals with more interest in the area to move beyond and to use it as a mechanism, not just for building capacity, but for building professional development for extension professionals. And then we talked a bit more about how we might pivot the mechanisms we use in other capacities to engage the public, and how that might work in tandem with the water networks activities, and how extension could add value to the network, taking advantage of the capacities we have for convening, facilitation, transmission of knowledge, translation of research. And then flipping that around, also seeing extension as a conduit to bring community-based and traditional knowledge into the conversation around water, recognizing that traditional knowledge is often underrepresented, and that there's a social justice component to that as well. But that especially when we get into things like easy topics like salmon recovery, attention to both the social justice and the traditional knowledge elements are pretty critical. And then finally, we had an interesting follow-on conversation about how doing all of those things would improve extension's capacity to engage in and impact both resilience at several scales, and positively impact policy. And again, sub conversation, but really interesting about, could we envision a time when extension could take predictive capacity based on the data work of the network, do some forecasting or benefit from network forecasting, and get out ahead of the cycle on issues of resilience and negative perturbations, right? What do we do with drought, for instance, and positively impact community capacity, community response, and policy to help mediate those events. I think that's all we had. Okay.
So my notes got taken and they were placed on the wall. And so I have to go off of memory, which has been dissipating very rapidly. So we started off with the question that Mike had posed to us at the very beginning of the session as we moved into the facilitation. And that was, what are some of the organizations that you can think of that would be a good model for building capacity? And one of the things that the experiment station directors have control over is multi-state research projects and activities, and funding to support those. And so one of the concepts was similar to what is, I think, being organized, where all of the multi-state committees that work in this area could work together on and then feed into like the Western Water Network. We mentioned a specific model that's like that at the national level, and that the model that was mentioned was the National Integrated Pest Management Coordinating Committee, where every region has a project and also a center, and then all of those individuals work on behalf of the region on the national level. So something like that was mentioned as a way to move forward. The experiment station director's premise has been, and major focus is, research and coordination of research activities across the region. And so that's been the lens that they've been viewing this through. And so when the question comes up of what is the added value of a network like this, it's the ability to bring researchers together to work on projects and seek and secure funding so that they can address questions that are important, maybe within and across states. But I think if I go back to some of the original thoughts behind addressing water, the comments were, we want to capitalize on our multi-state network so that we can have more activity in research by our multi-state groups. And so want to just make sure that that's captured. But then there was additional points about the added value And that deals with the network maybe serving as a repository for data that could be aggregated by scientists so that they could actually produce these models then that could be utilized to predict and address and help mitigate catastrophic events. So a specific catastrophic event that was mentioned was wildfire, and you know, dealing with the consequences and research around that, watershed management, erosion issues, and those type of things related to, you know, how does that affect water quality, and all kinds of issues related to that. So some of the same comments that were mentioned there. One other thing that was discussed was the ability to pool expertise and resources together so that you might be able to share and not have to duplicate hiring of a scientist that works in an area. And that included then better interaction with groups like SAM represents. And because it was pointed out, in many cases, the natural resources groups that have water in their portfolio are not part of the experiment station, or they're not in the colleges. And so there would be opportunity through this type of network to link the scientists that they have hired and have direct funding capability to provide with others that may be able to pursue some of these research areas that would be difficult otherwise. So I'm looking now across the room at some of the directors that were there, and help me if I miss something that you think is critical.
So maybe just one point, you may have touched on it already, Brett, but is also the ability to identify new areas of research that we maybe not even thought of or don't even know about yet, emerging from this, identifying the issues that we then can go back and address.
Yeah, something that was put in the parking lot was related to that, and that is trying to come up with the proper verbiage here. It was more like direct or guide future funding opportunities by identifying key gaps. And that would go as far as maybe setting agendas for research and funders that would be interested in filling those gaps.
Well, thanks to the three of you for providing those summaries. I think it's helpful for those of us who were in ballroom 3 to hear that and to hear how what you were discussing resonates so much with what we are, and that we can also use your ideas to help build as we move forward. So I wanted to turn briefly now next to objective number 2 that Mike put up for us, which was to plan for the 2023 Congress. So what is this Congress? What is this Congress? What is it that we hope to get out of it? Who is the audience for it? So I'd like to start with the audience. Since the network is designed to be a network that facilitates coordinated action among water researchers, extension agents, specialists, and their key clientele across state boundaries, we envision at this point that the Congress attendees will be researchers, extension educators, and specialists, along with their key clientele. I mean, the idea would really be to bring more people into the fold that this network of networks would help to support. In terms of goals for the Congress, certainly what we want to do is to build out the Western Water Network and to have this audience and these participants come together to join with us to further develop the network and help realize it and demonstrate its full potential. And then a second goal really is to get our hands dirty and get to work in terms of, defining problems and sort of breaking them down into manageable problems that we can then attack and solve, to examine current barriers, the reasons that we have these barriers, whether it's state boundaries or other barriers that exist, and then also what are other ways that we might envision structuring things to move ourselves forward in the future. So now we're ready for the next slide. And Sam's going to take it from here in terms of, well, what are we going to do at this Congress? Sam.
Okay, thank you. So this slide is a mind map from our discussion, and it gives the title of our anticipated Congress in 2023, which is Transcending Boundaries, Building Collaboration, a roadmap for the future of water management in the West. And we have these categories that have been identified through both the survey that Christy mentioned that was part of our early roadmap to build the topics that we're addressing. And you see these main categories: research, extension, education needs, culture of water, water quantity, quality, groundwater, and surface water. And we had some great discussions about how to actually implement these. And I came into our group this morning saying, okay, I want to go through all these lists of all these great ideas we had and tell all the directors about all the granularity of impressive content. And the group quickly set me straight and said, no way, we're actually trying to keep this. After 2.5 days of content, I'm sure you guys are full. So I'm not going to go into this, just give one example. So we saw from the surveys of water managers, water users, experiment station employees, and directors and faculty that this ag, municipal, industrial, and ecological uses was important. And then in our discussion, we started talking about the color of water. And something that we feel this network can do is go across these different users and sources of water. For example, there's all these colors like blue water from reservoirs for water supply, green water from the landscape that, with precipitation grows grass. There's purple water that's reused by municipalities. But there aren't a lot of efforts that actually go across those different flavors or colors of water and show how you can have an integrated plan for community water resilience. And we feel like this network can actually take lessons learned from the experiment stations, from the different states, from producer networks, and share them. Because we had these little examples when we were just talking among our small groups in the Western Water Network sessions that we learn from each other. And so this is just one of the basic things. We're quite confident that we can make a meaningful impact by addressing these complex issues by sharing material. So there's my one little effort at providing some detail. Other big categories, the data, understanding and synthesis. We really think that's something this network can do, because like Michael gave in his slide, we already have these networks, but there aren't a lot of efforts that move across the states, across the West. Of course, we're not going to try and do everything. We heard from Tony Willardson. Their group is doing some nice integrative efforts across the West, and we really anticipate that'll be important. And of course, spatial scale, that just means, going all the way from producer meaningful applied content to the regional West-wide understanding that we think can help. And just wanted to give a few next steps, and then our presentation is over. We will summarize and synthesize the content we came up with here. We'll create a concrete timeline with deadlines and accountability for building out this Western Water Network and the Congress. And we'll have continued ideas for funding and support. What do we need to make this happen? So I didn't mention that third objective of moving the needle, we really think this is going to be creation of a document that basically captures the material. It'll come out of this Congress. We'll have a paper or a document. Some people did or didn't think that a published paper was important, but the idea is to have a tangible document to meet that third objective of moving the needle. And some of the things we need are to have funding for the Congress. We need some baseline funding to keep our expert advisory group going, the administrative and institutional support. And of course, we'll have need some input on who needs to be here, because we just like by moving beyond our advisory group to this broader group at this meeting, we already have both affirmed some of our core principles, but also added new content that we needed. So I guess I would like to conclude it's clearly just a brief, broad brush over what we've talked about with a question for you, which is, what do you most want to see happen to make the great things that we've gotten going here happen in the future? What would you, as directors, participants, really anybody at this point, but particularly the directors, what would you most want to see happen?
Is so when you mention about moving the needle, what do you mean by that? What are the objectives or that you're looking at?
Yeah, well, I think that, I mean, we don't just want to plan a Congress. We don't just want to develop another network. And so we actually want to see a facilitation of meaningful efforts to resolve problems in the water world. And so I think I think that a lot of us who have been in this room for the past few days can identify, the things that keep us from doing our job better, from doing research or doing extension, and that we see this network as a way that we can break down some of those barriers to allow us to do our jobs better. So I'm not sure that was not concrete enough, but I mean, this is where we are, right? We have a tremendous amount of detail from days of discussion, and I think we need to go home and digest and think about your question, all of us.
Could I just follow up quickly on that? Brett so often mentioned the idea of an audacious proposal. We really just realized that water management in the West isn't moving the way it needs to, and we are thinking about ways that we can bring this great expertise across the West together in efforts that might actually make a difference in ways that haven't before. So it's not completely realized, but it's very applied. So we're not just trying to get a bunch of academic papers. We're trying to make a difference in management.
Okay, and so then my follow-up question would be, when you talk about better management of water in the West, how do you look at water law? Because I mean, the laws, how do you put that into your discussions? Because, here in Nevada, I mean, there's so many different laws and things that impact how we are able to manage water. And so if you're talking about managing water in the West, you're going to have to look at all that and put that into that same context, any management plan.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a response ready? So my quick response is that we talked about that a lot, and there is a lot of sharing of lessons for how communities, regions have been successful in, for example, being water resilient within prior appropriation. So we feel like we can actually make a difference on adding some of these, basically creating ways to share education, research on these solutions that are within, for example, existing water law. Because some people would say to make a meaningful difference in the West, we need to explode water law and start from scratch. But we talked about, and I'm trying to just go back to the detailed conversations we had, where you can actually use this idea of sharing at scale, getting from the local to the regional to create these solutions within existing water law. So that's just an example of the way we talked about it.
So I think your question back to us was what we would like to see from this. And so what I'm hoping for is sort of a guide star of something for the future. And I'm thinking back to some, pivotal seminal publications that have helped to shape sort of the research landscape in agriculture. And, when I'm thinking, National Academy publications that are at the level of, I think one Science Breakthroughs for 2030 for food and agriculture, something like that. I would like to see something come from this group, but then continuing work from this group that helps us all identify where the priority areas are and sort of some strategy. I know you're not going to be able to map everything out, but sort of some general strategies to get there. That then as experiment station directors, we can start to think about supporting funding in those areas, encouraging work in those areas, and where we can also bring others alongside of us in the ag and food space that help to achieve those objectives. Because I think without that, and I guess in our meeting, I made the comment, this thing is so big, it's water is everywhere. Do you address the civil issues, the civil engineering issues of water? Is it the food industry in terms of the processing? Is it water for production agriculture? It's huge, as we all know. But I kind of like to see something come from this group that provides us sort of with that mechanism to say, okay, these are the things that we see as tangibles that we can go towards that will make a difference. And here's sort of why we see that. Big ask.
Well, it is a big ask, but you described it very well. It's definitely something that we have been talking about a lot. And we've been referring to this thing that you just described as our vision paper. But we do have in mind that, National Academy of Sciences, and, just this is what needs to be done. And so how can we, break this up into bite-sized chunks and get it done? So thank you for expressing that so well.
Yeah, I took some notes, very nicely stated.
What do you most want to see happen next? What's more?
Well, I think I agree with Sean. Once you have a big document like that, that we could break it into bite-sized pieces with the white papers that we can show to legislators and help to identify funding for research projects, extension projects, or whatever. But a giant document like that's going to be too much. But I think, like Sean, I think I would love to read it and think, okay, here's maybe something manageable that fits this call for proposals that I just saw the other day. And here we have a team of people to choose from that might be interested in this call. So.
Jackie is not aware that I'm going to do this to her, but she's very good at this. I'd really like to know from somebody that is not an academic, like the rest of us that are sitting in here, what she sees could be done with this network to benefit her, the constituents of the group that she represents. That'd be state legislators, by the way.
Or funders, as they're referred to here. Good morning. And thanks, Brett. We're going to talk after this. Yeah. So I was really, is such a great conversation. I'm so glad that we started with asking what you all were talking about, because we had no idea. And so much of what you talked about is echoed in the conversations we had. For example, the term social justice was used, and you didn't see it up there, but particularly in the areas of culture of water and use of water, ag, municipal. We talked about, we use the term equity. So, I mean, we're still at those places where we need to figure some precision out. And I think that's just part of the process. But you know, where I see this network playing a role is really connecting research to practice. Somebody talked about water law and you know, water law, we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact. It's under renegotiation now. We're going to have new rules. It is a binational effort to regulate that basin with Mexico and with the US and multi-state as well. The same goes for the Columbia River Basin. It is, you know, a Canadian US effort. And governing that and managing that, there are opportunities in both areas. Where I see the big bang here is in management, not governance or regulation or rules. I think that within the frameworks that have been built up and going forward, there's a bit more flexibility being built in quite intentionally in the language that is coming out, simply because there's a larger recognition that people closest to water need to be able to move nimbly to make the right decisions for managing the water in the best way where the water is at and among the users of that water. So that's where I see this network as really filling a niche that is currently unfilled, bringing researchers together, practitioners together. You know, to me, extension, here's extension, a repository of expertise, research, and also establish best practices. And you are in the community, you know, getting those implemented and working with producers and communities. But I don't see that sort of feeding back into my world, which is the policy world and policymakers. And I use that term broadly. I'm talking about regulators. I'm talking about folks who are concerned about governance generally, but also lawyers and legislators. So, you know, that's where I see this network really filling that niche and being able to tell the story of water right now. When you read the news, it's all bad news. But I get to sit with folks like you, and I see a lot of really good news and a lot of reason for optimism, which gives momentum to feed that work and to fund the work. So that's my short intro. And I'm sorry if it's not really responsive to what you asked.
No.
I'll give it another try.
No, I appreciate that, Jackie. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to recognize you and thank you. I'm sure that's been done already, but Jackie is a policy advisor in, I think that's your proper title, in the Council of State Governments West. And so represent the organization that pulls legislators across the West together and has similar conversations. And so thank you for being here and joining us in these important discussions.
Welcoming me and listening to my not always on point comments. So I thank the group that worked with me.
And I just also wanted to recognize too, I don't think he's in the room, he had to leave early, was Jonathan Sheffield from the National Association of Counties, Western Interstate Region. And so of course, he works with county commissioners, and county commissioners have some water things that they often have on their mind. And so it was great to have him here to provide some insight from that perspective too.
Yeah, I'm here learning a lot about your network, but Jonathan and I belong to something called the Western Policy Network. And that includes the Western Governors Association, the Association of Water Managers out West, a whole bunch of folks. We meet regularly. We also often will collaborate on joint statements regarding water to our federal partners and agencies, because in the West, well, across the nation, states are co-regulators of water. And that sometimes gets lost in the conversations with federal partners. And so part of our job is to advocate that states have that co-regulator voice and presence at the table when we're talking about differences. So I'll leave that information with you to see how that might resonate with the work that you're doing and the impacts you're trying to have.
Thanks for letting me hijack that conversation, but I think it was important to hear from Jackie.
Maybe reach out to the virtual audience the way we've been.
So we'd like to invite the folks participating remotely. If you have some observations you'd like to share, now would be a good time to do that.
So this is Ginger Page. You can hear me. Okay, cool. And I just wanted to say how much I was there and I had to leave to come back for meetings in Wyoming. But I just wanted to say how great it was to hear the summaries of the discussions from both the WIDA meeting and the directors meeting in terms of those first two questions. I think that was very valuable to hear, and I think we can incorporate that in as we move forward. But I think that was valuable insights into the potential future of the network and where it can move.
Alan or Freddie or Travis?
Just that we'll continue to follow along, I guess, and see how we go.
I don't have anything to add. I appreciate all the comments and it was very insightful.
Okay, I'll turn it back to you guys.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for providing institutional and funding support for us to come here and meet together in person. That was huge. And I think it was also useful for us to be meeting at the same time as you all were meeting. I think we gained a lot of insight into how this could work and what this should be and what niche we could fill simply by being adjacent to your own conversations.
Also, we do have reams of notes here. We will give a report that as a kind of a follow-up and we'll distribute it to the participants. So if you have some brainstorms in the interim, there'll be a venue for you to participate before we start getting some of this stuff documented in the Congress and our vision paper. Brett, do you want to close us out here? You're kind of one of the instigators that got this thing on its track.
Sam pulled a page out of my book. I'm usually the one that. Thanks, Sam. I've already expressed appreciation to certain individuals in the room. I know that you've met Mike and Lucia. The facilitation that was done by them was absolutely essential to keep us moving. They've been instrumental in keeping this group organized and on track. And I think it paid dividends from what I heard from all of the participants. So well done and thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then the other thing is some of our leadership team has had to leave. And some of them are on the virtual setting. And I just want to recognize those of them that really were instrumental in moving everything that you've heard to the point to where we're at. Let me just go back in time real quick. Actually, I'll try not to go all the way from Lincoln era. But in about 2013, I'm just going to tell this story real quick. 2013, the directors of the experiment station and extension recognized that we needed to start working more closely together. And from that, we had a series of conversations very similar to what you have done as a water network. It took us a lot longer to get to where you are, I think. But what evolved out of that was a document that we refer to as the Western Perspective, Western Agenda. We published that in 2015. That has been a roadmap that the region has been using to help guide some of the initiatives that are coming out from the directors. So fast forward a little bit. Before the pandemic hit, we had an in-person meeting in New Mexico, and we had a session on what is the next thing that's in this roadmap that you would like to address. And the resounding response from the experiment station was water. Let's just be bold and tackle water. And so what eventually evolved is everything that you projected today out of that conversation. And I just think that it's important to recognize that we would not be in this room had it not been for the directors to say water is important. So kudos to the directors. Thank you for not only supporting that effort, but also by, and I'm not saying only in moral standards, directors actually even provided financial support, which was alluded to before. So thank you for doing that and recognizing this is an important topic that needs to continue to be addressed. And then I was fortunate enough to hold a mini summit. And from that mini summit, we had several volunteers who said, be more than happy to help you figure out what this is going to be and what it's about. And Sam, I think you or Christy, somebody mentioned that we meet regularly. We have a weekly meeting plan. And what we have found is if it was not for having that regular meeting of the team and bringing that brain trust together, we would never have even been anywhere close. So I just want to recognize too, the people that made all of this happen. Two of them are up in front. Jen is over here. Mike Gaffney has been participating when he can, and when he's not there, he's given assignments, as we learned the other day. Doreen came in about midway after her predecessor departed. So thank you, Doreen. And the screen is blank, but I saw Travis online, and Ginger had already spoken. Those are the core group that provide advice and are constantly thinking about this. They must be constantly thinking, because here's the cool thing. They participate weekly. Some people have scheduling conflicts, but we have the majority of these individuals that I just called out on that weekly call. So thank you very much.
Jennifer or Brett, does everybody know what happens next? Do you need to transition out of this room and into something else like a organized lunch or whatever?
We adjourn.
That's clear.
All right.
Well, good 3 days. Enjoy whatever comes next for everybody. Safe travels home.
It's great to meet you all and go through this with you. I enjoyed it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Thank you all for being so engaged and invested. It was great to meet you.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 I know the projector just died a sudden death and didn't respond to any of my, so I texted, but we had 10 minutes left, so.